Blaxland for more on the upcoming AUKUS meeting. He's a professor of international security and intelligence studies at Australian National University and joins us now live from Canberra. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. There are so many dimensions to this security partnership. Broad strokes, what is the significance of AUKUS?
The key point here, Leila, thanks for having me on, is that this will enable Australia to join the club of countries with nuclear propulsion submarines. Australia will get, the first tranche will be on loan or visiting ships from boats, I should say, from the United States that will be ported in Western Australia on the west coast in the Indian Ocean. That will be followed a decade or so later by the acquisition of Virginia-class submarines by Australia, having worked to supplement the production capability in the United States. And then following that will be a jointly developed submarine that includes technology from the United States centred on a British model, Astute-class submarine that's more in the keeping of Australia's numbers of sustainable submariner crew. So this is about nuclear propulsion for the Australian Navy, but it's also about a range of other technologies, about hypersonics, about collaboration between these three trusted partners on advanced weapon systems in light of the emergence of the great power contestation we've seen unfold not just over Ukraine, but obviously the risks of conflict in the Indo-Pacific in relation to China's rise.
Now, Australia is the one who asked for this defence pact, if I understand correctly. Does this mean that Australia believes a potential military confrontation with China is likely?
So there's a growing likelihood, unfortunately, because we've seen with the wolf warrior diplomacy, the exercise of sharp power, and the approach to expansion in the South China Sea, the way it's treated Hong Kong, the way it's treated Japan, Korea, the way it's operating in the South Pacific as well, I should say. Australia's got nervous. We've seen the armed forces of China expand. The Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, Cyber Force, Ballistic Missile Force have all expanded exponentially in the last few years, dramatically raising concerns about what that means for the security of Australia. And this is really what's driven this imperative. A decade ago, this would have been unimaginable, but the changes in China, the wolf warrior diplomacy, President Xi's own actions have generated a wake-up call in Australia, the US and the UK and beyond. And that's what we're seeing the fruits of today.
Now, Australia, to put it very simplistically, sells a lot of stuff to China. China is arguably Australia's most important trading partner. Can Australia's trade relationship with Beijing be separated from now this alliance that Beijing essentially sees as anti-China? I mean, it's a delicate balancing act that Canberra has to enact here.
Yeah, so, I think that President Xi needs to look in a mirror here. He needs to look at what's happened and why Australia went from being much more well-disposed to China to being much more adversarial. And that's, it's really something that China needs to consider. But a key point here, Leila, I would make is that China does not buy from Australia because it likes our liberal Western democracy. It only does so because it's a good deal. And the attempts to impose financial trade sanctions and punishments on Australia have not worked. They've backfired. They've actually generated further resistance in Australia. As the global economy is not a command economy. There's ebbs and flows. There's bear markets, bull markets, feasts of famines, floods, fires. So many variables China doesn't control. If they don't want to buy our barley, we can, sell to someone else. But they clearly want to buy from us our iron ore, our coal, our gas, and many other resources. This is not about our democratic political system, and I think it's important to separate the issues out. This is about Australia responding to the fear that's generated by China's militarization and expansion of its force and its rhetoric. And that's, I think, really, it's in the lap of the Chinese as to what happens next.
A final thought from you, Professor. What does this mean for Australia's place in the region? I mean, what has the response been from the rest of the countries?
So when the AUKUS announcement came out 18 months ago, there was some real annoyance in France, which has territory in the Pacific, in New Caledonia and Tahiti, particularly in neighbouring Indonesia, Malaysia and other countries in Southeast Asia, concerned about this being called without having been given any prior notice. But since then, the current government of Anthony Albanese has worked really hard to brief in the Indonesians, Malaysians, the French, the others in the Pacific and beyond, to allay any fears that they may have about what this means, and also to make the point that, hey, we're all in this mix. We're all feeling the pinch of the wolf warrior diplomacy, the exercise of sharp power, the intimidation from China. Our neighbours in Southeast Asia in particular have been buffeted by the approach by China in the South China Sea. Behind closed doors, they're all kind of quietly saying, keep up the good work, Australia.
Professor John Blaxland, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show, Laila.